This is the My Campaign Coach podcast, where we talk about how to win elections. Every week, we let you hear straight from the best consultants, operatives, and candidates in the game, all for one reason, to help you win. For more information about how we can help you win, visit mycampaigncoach.com. Now, here's your host, Raj Schaefer.
Welcome to the How to Run for Office podcast from My Campaign Coach. Every week I mention Campaign Sidekick and the power that it can bring to your campaign's ground game. Not only do they make this podcast possible, but I use the platform every week to manage and canvassing teams I work with around the country. In the last month alone, it's helped efforts I've been working on to knock over 50,000 doors across multiple states. It's fast, easy to use, and completely reliable. Check them out at campaignsidekick.vote. Our guest this week is a fellow Hillsdale College graduate. Ian Swanson is the host of The American Way and co-host of Omaha's Morning Answer radio shows on 1420 AM The Answer in Omaha, Nebraska. A native Nebraskan, Ian graduated with honors from Hillsdale College in 2014 with a Bachelor of Arts in Political Economy and is currently pursuing a Master's in Public Policy at Liberty University. Ian recently ran for the Nebraska legislature and came incredibly close to beating a popular incumbent in a hotly contested race. When he isn't defending the Constitution on the airwaves, Ian can be found drinking lots of coffee, supporting his Nebraska Cornhuskers, and reading anything possible from Winston Churchill and William Wilberforce. Ian, thanks for being with us today. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Raz. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you on. We've had a lot of candidates on the podcast and campaign folks, but I'm really excited to get your perspective as somebody that's a young guy that's run, that did very well, but ended up coming up short on the election night. Let's start off, before we get into the kind of the mechanics of your campaign and a lot of those lessons that you learned. Talk to me about how you got involved in politics and kind of a little bit of your backstory.
Sure. So I've always been interested in running for office. I mean, I'm a Hillsdale College graduate, so I suppose you get that love for liberty and the fire burns and you want to make sure you can get involved as soon as you possibly can. Kind of started looking at it after the 2014 cycle got through. My then Republican congressman got beat and was one of only two Republican incumbents to lose. He kind of shot himself in the foot, and that's kind of why he did. And I said, wow, the Republican Party is fractured. What can I do about it? So I'd been working for the party at the time, and I said, I think I really should run for office. It was a Republican district. We're really weird in our state. We got non-partisan elections for our unicameral legislature. So, a lot of the dynamics are very unique here. And so I had a Democrat representing me in my state legislature. And I said, this is a Republican district and nobody wants to take this guy on. So somebody's got to do it. So I just called all of the people that I trusted and said, hey, do you think this is something that somebody should do? And they said, man, you're going to knock on the doors. You're going to do the work. We really think that you could have a shot at this. And so a year and a half later, the campaign season all the way through the end, it was a remarkable experience. And I hope that whatever lessons that I've learned can help other candidates experience all the joys of it and get that extra 3% that I didn't get in my race.
I definitely understand that. Well, and you've obviously learned a whole lot from those lessons. You and I talked, shortly after the November election when you lost there, and it was really impressive to me already what you processed through and what you learned about what you did wrong and what you were very happy with as far as how your campaign performed. Before we get into that, though, what prior to Hillsdale, what kind of political involvement do you have, and kind of how did that shape your desire to eventually run? What was this a long time family thing you were involved in politics?
My parents are worship leaders, so no, I'm the first person to kind of really be involved with it. I worked on a number of congressional campaigns before, so I've been around campaigns. I knew a little bit about how the bigger ones worked, but the first time really having a super active role outside of a congressional campaign, for anything local, was deciding to run for office myself.
So you had a whole lot of heavy community involvement and deep ties there from growing up there in the Omaha area and your parents' involvement through church and everything. But coming out of Hillsdale and getting involved there, as far as the congressional and local elections, that was really your first taste. So that was a big step to go jump right into running yourself. Yes, and
it was interesting given you go away to school for 4 years to come back. I'm 25 now, but I was 23 when I made the decision to run. So it wasn't a whole long time after I graduated that I'd made the decision to do it. So I had a lot of community connections and some political connections, but oftentimes those two were in different camps, and so I had to try to find ways to bring people together and share that one side of my life with the other side of my life, the political.
So how did you approach that decision to run? You said you had a few folks that approached you about it, and you've been asking people about who might be able to run. Walk me through your thought process. You're a young guy. You knew you're going against a pretty powerful incumbent. This was not going to be an easy race. What was your thought process, and what were some of the questions you were asking yourself as you did that?
Yeah, kind of, if not me, then who? If not now, then when, right? So if you have an incumbent that disagrees with you on every major issue in a district that needs to elect a conservative because it's a 2-to-1 Republican district on paper, it's suburbia, it's like the prime district for a takeover opportunity. If I wasn't willing to step up and do it now, when I'm not married, I don't have all of these obligations that other people have, knowing that I do the work, then why? How can I basically say I passed up an opportunity to be a member of the team, to try to help flip liberal seats to conservatives in our Nebraska legislature, knowing all of the issues that we were going to have to face? So Governor Kayor, former Governor Kayor, was the very first person that said, "Oh my gosh, I want to endorse you and get out and help." And so her help was absolutely essential. A lot of people said no at the beginning. They didn't think that a 23-year-old kid had any chance of doing it. It's pretty rare in Nebraska to have younger folks that run, because we only have 49 seats in our state house, unlike New Hampshire, where seemingly everybody is elected to office. Mm-hmm. So the dynamics are different, but you just have to work hard. You just have to prove to them that you are truly committed to it. Make the phone calls, knock on the doors, and really, take that whatever crack in the door that they give you and shove it open to try to, make yourself a more viable candidate.
That's really admirable. I mean, taking that opportunity and saying, look, somebody's got to do it. You looked around and couldn't find anybody else, and nobody else wanted to take on the guy. It's also kind of a weird setup. No offense to the Nebraska, but the way you guys have your legislature set up is kind of weird compared to a lot of the rest of the country. It's nonpartisan, right? That's right. While it's a 2-to-1 Republican district, you're running it as a nonpartisan office. So it's not really a Republican versus Democrat, as far as the R and the D are not prominent things that are attached to you as a legislator. A lot of the people that are in the know where you stand, but much like a municipal election here in Texas or in a lot of the rest of the country, it's not quite as easy to draw that clear party affiliation when you're running. So that kind of had to make it weird, especially given the 2016 effect when you're running there. Did that impact the race?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it doesn't appear on the ballot. That's what that means. So it just says nonpartisan next to our name. So it's incumbent upon every candidate to make sure that Republicans knew that I was the Republican and that the other guy was a Democrat. And so it really plays with the traditional coalitions, because name ID is really everything in a race like mine. And I was going up against a former high school principal that everybody knew, everybody's kids went to their school. And so even though they all knew him, my job was to just continually remind them, he's a very liberal Democrat. You're not a very liberal Democrat, so vote for Ian, right? So you can continually pound them with information about that. And so it's hard, because in my state, the budgets are between 100 and 150,000, depending on whether it's an open seat or a challenger race. So it's not like a lot of people do TV, because I'm still in the Omaha market, and there are 10 of the 49 legislative districts that one market serves. Mm-hmm. So really, you're
just not able to target very well using the TV there.
That's right. So it's really direct mail, knocking on doors, social media, website marketing, those kinds of things. Very grassroots ways of reaching out to folks. At the end, it was tough seeing numbers, because we had a Democrat congressman the last 2 years, and then we just elected a new congressman in our district this year. So it was tough on election night seeing 800 votes in a precinct for Trump, 850 votes for now Congressman Bacon, and 500 votes for me. I wish we could have done a better job of just making sure that Republicans knew that I was the Republican. But at some level, you have a finite budget, and you got to make do with what you have.
That's definitely one of those areas where every area, every municipality, state, they have their own idiosyncrasies. and you definitely got slapped upside the head by that one. It's really tough. I mean, it's one of those things where I've seen state senate elections here in Texas where you'd have people zigzagging on the ballot. They'd vote Republican and one for president, Democrat for state senate, and then Republican again for House. And that's very rare. It takes some pretty erratic behavior to do that. In your case, because they didn't know who was the Republican, who was the Democrat, they went with the name that they knew the most, and that's a tough thing to overcome, especially when your opponent has your universal name ID.
That's right, and even oftentimes when you go to a door and you tell them, "Hey, I'm the Republican and he's the Democrat," you're a Republican. Here's all the issues that we agree on. It's still hard for people when it's a nonpartisan race to get over the fact, well, he taught my kids, or we go to church together, or something like that. It seems like on national races, it's easier to get people to recognize the importance of voting their party, or at least voting their ideology, right? I mean, even if you're dealing with those kinds of differences as well. In my case, I'm a very much a liberty conservative running against a very much Bernie Sanders Democrat, so the contrast could not be more stark. Yet, not enough people were able to realize that contrast.
In cases where you had success with that, I mean, obviously you didn't have as much of a budget or the time as you would have liked to be able to get out that message, but I'm sure in some cases you're able to hit home with that message. What was it that helped pull people your direction? How did you convince them of that when you were talking to them in person?
Yeah, so I kind of focused on two main strategies. Number one was showing off the endorsements. I mean, and by the end, it was pretty much every big name Republican in my state that was on my endorsements card. And especially given the fact that I was 24 at the time, just reminding people, hey, all of these other folks, I know you think I'm young, but all of these folks that are in elected office, believe in me and want to see me win. So, get on board with the Republican team. And then the other one, you do your standard contrast mail pieces, the side-by-sides. Here are all the issues. Here's Ian's position. Here's Senator Kolowski's positions. It's pretty straightforward, right? You name the issue, and we were going to be on our opposite sides of it. And when people read it, when people considered those messages, they were very surprised in most cases, even though we knew he was a liberal Democrat 4 years ago when he got elected. So it was just a question of trying to break through in the 2016 race when all the energy and oxygen was focused on the presidential race and, to a lesser degree, our congressional race. Getting people to understand the significance of my down-ballot race was a challenge, and that's why door-to-door was such a primary driver of messaging for me.
When you were first building out your campaign plan, you had to consider the fact that you had a primary, then you had to go up against a strong incumbent in the general. So what were you thinking, and kind of what was that process as you were building out this campaign plan? You talked about the importance of fundraising, door-to-door. You wanted to raise a bunch of money to make sure you had your name out there, you could maximize name ID. What was that process looking like for you when you first started that campaign?
So the first thing I tried to do was reach out to the elected officials that I thought would endorse me early. Because oftentimes, if you're a new candidate, especially if you're a young candidate, you need to be able to tell people, and oh, by the way, Omaha Mayor Gene Stauth would endorse me, or oh, by the way, former Governor Kayor, just to get your foot in the door, to be able to ask for fundraising, to get your name off, to get your campaign off the ground. So I picked a couple of those folks that were courageous enough to be willing to endorse early, and then you capitalize that on trying to drive people to events where they can just hear me talk. And as a Hillsdale graduate, as people went throughout the campaign, they said, wow, as soon as I heard you speak, I really understood that you were serious about this and I wanted to support you. So then my job became putting myself in front of as many people as possible to share the message with them about why I cared so much and why I thought they should care so much and how they could help me.
So how'd you do that? You talked about the door-to-door. What, how did you build that door-to-door program? Was it just you? Was it family members, volunteers, paid vendors? How did you build out that program?
Yeah, primarily grassroots. It was going to county party events, going to Tea Party events, Rotary clubs, speaking in front of those kinds of things, civil society groups, and then tons of family and friends from church. They were the ones that were out there early and often and kind of building the support, reaching out to college students and all of the kind of natural markets for me as a young conservative. And then as more and more people came in, then of course they told their friends. So a lot of it at the beginning was word of mouth marketing. And then it was getting in front of the like-minded groups that could say, okay, there's not going to be a more stark contrast of any race in the state this year. This is one that I know we can flip, and this is where your help is going to be the most important.
So I'd imagine that the experiences there on the campaign trail, they kind of fall broadly into two buckets. One are the things that went exactly the way you wanted them to, that you're really excited about and you felt really well prepared for. And the other side are the ones you're like, man, I wish I could do that differently. If I could go back again, I would probably leverage this knowledge to have a different result. Let's start out on the fun bucket, that number one, and say, what are some of the things on the campaign trail that you really felt like you were well prepared for, and as on the execution side, you absolutely crushed it?
I think that we hit more doors than we expected at the beginning. I think so. That was a real plus. We knew how important it was in a race that's based on name ID to get in front of as many voters as possible, as often as possible. And there's no better way to do that than knocking on a door in my suburban district. So I think we did a really nice job of that. Towards the end of the campaign, I think we did a really nice job of trying to target voters in the way that we were able. My mail vendor has a lot of individualized lists, lists of renters, for example, or lists of single people and those kinds of things. And then we actually wrote individual letters to those groups, those segmented lists, with a message specific to that list. So, for example, the most famous one, I wrote a letter to renters. I am a renter, and one of the first attack pieces that my opponent put out said, Ian doesn't understand what taxes are because he's never paid taxes. He's never paid property taxes, and how can he possibly understand tax burden? So I wrote a letter and I sent it out to all the renters saying, now as a renter that we pay property taxes. We just pay them indirectly through our rents. So how appalling is it that this guy is saying we don't understand the need for tax reform? So those kinds of things, capitalizing on those were really effective, and I got a really good response from people that received that letter.
So as you were building out that block walking program, what are some of the things that you learned that helped make that so successful? Think about this through the lens of our listeners who are wanting to build a better campaigns this cycle. What kind of information can you give them about how you built that to be so successful?
So number one, the most important lesson I learned was to be overly prepared before your volunteers walk into the door. So what we would do is we would segment the list, split them up into chunks by how long we thought they would take based on the number of doors and the length of time, so that when volunteers would come in, primarily on our big Super Saturdays, we would have all of these lists electronically and paper walkbooks prepared so that they could walk in and they could say, okay, I've got 2 hours today, Ian, what can I do? And then we'd hand them a list, or we'd upload a list on their walkbook app so that they knew exactly how much they could get done in a short period of time. They walked right into the door to our campaign office, they grabbed what they needed, and then they went right back out into the field. So and having food and drinks there so that they couldn't waste any time.
Yeah,
they could just grab a water bottle and get right back on the field. It takes a little bit more work on the front end, but you have more motivated volunteers. They know that you appreciate their time. They feel appreciated, and therefore, in my experience, they came back time and time again to knock on more doors.
That is awesome. And that's one of those things that from the process side and the planning side, you're right, it takes more time, but it saves you a lot of dead space in your schedule. And what I mean by that is that those volunteers, if they walk in and you're ready to send them right back out, that saves you a significant amount of time. Those 15 minutes or 20 minutes when they're waiting on you to get stuff printed out and ready and everything, maybe that means you got to get up 15 or 20 minutes earlier in order to do it, but their volunteer time is so important. You want to make sure that that's another couple of doors that they get out there and knock instead of waiting around for you to do basic campaign functions.
That's absolutely right, Raz. And the other thing about that is even if they're not door knocking, that principle still applies. So we had lots of letter writing parties where they would write individual letters to voters, giving them on a postcard reasons why they support me and asking for other people's support. So we'd bring all the food, we'd have all the supplies ready to go. We had all the scripts printed out on each individual station at our office. Everything was ready to go so that the moment that people showed up, that they had no excuse for not working. We had music playing, food. There was always an elected official there to encourage people to walk around or stop by. So there was a driver to get people to the event. Any excuse we tried to plan for, any excuse that people would have for not doing it, we tried to eliminate that distraction so that the time that they could spend, they knew that they were spending in a productive way that could earn me votes.
I cannot tell you how many times I've been in volunteer headquarters where they haven't done that. They've just given a laughably small amount of thought to how to make people effective. And it's tough work. I mean, as you guys know from having done it so well, it takes a lot of work to task volunteers and prepare all that information in advance.
Yes.
It means a lot of late nights and a lot of early mornings. But, man, you get so much more out of your volunteers, and in turn, they're so much more effective and much happier to come back. Because even though volunteers will oftentimes want those breaks, or they may kind of just socialize or hang out, the ones that matter, the ones that are actually going to help you win, they're going to appreciate the fact that you're maximizing their time and you're getting the most out of their time that they're giving. By separating out the productive time from the social time, either in different events or having clear lines of demarcation between the parts, you're able to make sure that they stay focused, to motivate them, and also to provide them the social aspect. All of those are important. But at the end of the day, if you're wasting their time, you're wasting your time, you're wasting your donors' dollars, and you're not going to win.
And the last thing I will say about this, Raz, is that the best way, I think, to kind of manage that and facilitate that, we would have another state senator or city council person or somebody come in at the very beginning to kind of do the rah-rah 5-minute talk. Here's why it's important. Here's how you can make a difference. And then they would leave or they would help. And then we'd have somebody else come back at the end of the allotted time. For example, if you're making calls, right when the last call is supposed to be made, then that elected official shows up and they say, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And then you have a little bit of a social time where, it's already dark. You can't make any more phone calls. And then they can always ask them, hey, by the way, we're going to stay here for an extra couple of hours. You want to write some postcards with us? And give them something extra, like extra credit that they can do. And the last thing about it is we finally, towards the end of the campaign, I think too late, but we learned this eventually, to make care packages for people to take home. So even if they came to call, we would have care packages ready that, okay, can you take home 50 postcards and bring these back to us next week? Can you address them at work or when you're watching TV in the evening or something? Little tiny things, again, depending on how much time they thought they could give, so that every time that they came in, they did something and then they left with a project, so that they had to come back in the door at a future point, in which case we could say, hey, here's something else you can do, and try to maximize the number of touches that person can have on voters.
Well, and when you track those assignments to people, especially the ones they take home with them, and you're able to follow up and encourage them to complete those, that's a really great way of keeping them motivated and exercising a little bit of social pressure to make sure that they're staying involved and help maximize what they can do for you.
And there's nothing against having a volunteer leaderboard to see who's doing the best.
Not at all. Every chance you can to kind of gamify that process, especially when you're talking about folks that are regular and that they are motivated by that. Figure out what motivates your volunteers, first of all. And this can be on a personal level. It can be on a team level. But figure out what motivates them. And by doing so, one, you're going to build a much better relationship with these folks, because this should be a long-term relationship that lasts not just through to Election Day, but that lasts. And they can be those people that are helping hold you accountable and hold you to your original campaign promises and personality throughout your term in office. So that's really important. But by having a good understanding of what motivates them on a personal level, you're going to know, hey, does this person want Chick-fil-A at their volunteer headquarters? Yep. Do they want pizza? Do they want, do they really want flowers? If they do something great, I'll get them flowers. Or do they want a gift card to Whataburger? You figure out what really motivates them, and then you model your program about that. Because I've seen as many different types of volunteer programs as I have campaigns, and they really need to be customized to the different people that are helping you.
Yeah. One more thing about the door knocking, to go back just a little bit. We gave people 2 or 3 different options of the type of door knocking that they could do. So for our best, most persuasive door knockers, as we kind of figured out who those people were, we would give them much more persuasive messages. where we actually would want them to stop and give 2 or 3 reasons why they supported me. And then for the folks that necessarily didn't want to talk to people, then, we just give them a bunch of things to lit drop, or, Republican only pieces if they could use an app, or if they didn't want to use an app, we had a non-partisan message that they could drop at every door. So again, I think it's so important to try to find ways that everybody can help, and you fit the task to the skills that they have, because everybody wants to contribute in some way, but a lot of people don't think that they can, because they think that they're either not in good enough shape or not a good talker on the phone. They don't have some kind of ability. So you have to get through that by saying, okay, well, here's something you can do. And in my experience, when you do that and you show them that you've thought about it, how they can participate, they're much more likely to say yes to helping you.
That's a really smart way to kind of bifurcate and break apart those different abilities and make sure that you always have somebody, because you never want somebody to have a desire to volunteer, but you don't have a ready-made task for them. You want to always have ready-made tasks available, regardless of what type of thing that is. Whether it's, hey, you got 5 minutes, okay, why don't you go take out the trash? Or 15, why don't you go clean the bathroom? Or you can't go, knock doors, or here's a phone, or here's some postcards to fill out. Or, oh man, you can run, but you can't actually talk to people at the door, aren't comfortable with that. Lit dropping. Having all those different things, that is, kudos to you guys, because that's really well run. I like that. So the other side that you talked about earlier is fundraising. And that's really important, especially because a lot of campaigns and a lot of candidates, I should say, they hate dialing for dollars. They hate talking to people. In Nebraska, you guys primarily focus on, it seems, on large events rather than necessarily individual meetings, those kind of things. I know you did some of all of those, but talk first about how you approached fundraising in general. Was it hard for you to get to the point of asking for money? Was that easy for you? And how did you start out that process?
Yeah, it was very hard for me at first to ask for money because I'm always thinking about better ways that those people could use their money to pay house payments and such. But then I finally realized it clicked. I'm asking people to invest in a movement.
Right.
I'm asking people to invest in defending their liberty. I'm asking them to invest in a vision of lowering their taxes. And once I got back to that point and I really digested that, I was much more effective in asking people to help in that. So it was more important for me. It was a more effective tactic for me to push people to special events with big names, because in my experience, even though I would meet with a lot of people, unless I knew them personally, in which case it was a lot easier, if I was meeting somebody for the first time or kind of working off of a fundraising list, based on donations previous, it was a lot harder for me to convert that into a donation, because frankly, a lot of people just saw a 23 or 24-year-old kid asking them for money. So I pushed them to special events where they could see, Governor Ricketts introduce me and endorse me and say nice things, or somebody that they trusted, so that then when I shared my 5 to 10 minute talk and then went up to them after that and shook their hand and said, hey, I really could use your help, to make sure that this happened. That to me seemed to translate into a more effective fundraising message than just dialing. Although I did do that, and I asked people for coffees, and I would meet with them and do those things. But towards the end, I was kind of doing a pipeline from calling, asking them to meet me for coffee, and then at that coffee, inviting them to the next special event so they could see a lot of energy and meet other people and get excited about it.
Well, that was really playing to your specific strengths. You knew that you had an incredible list of folks that would endorse you and that were endorsing you. You understood the policies. You could articulate the vision, but you were trying to overcome that hurdle of being a 23-year-old and having blonde hair and looking like a young guy that you are.
Right.
And you needed to borrow that credibility from those endorsers. And then once somebody said, okay, well, Ian might know what he's talking about, then they hear you speak. Okay, now they're on board. Now they're actually willing to donate. But you really took a hard look at what the pros and cons were from a donor's perspective. You figured out what your biggest hurdles were, and you addressed them specifically through how you geared your fundraising program.
That's right.
So when you're doing that, you focus through that pipeline. It's a very systematic approach that I think, it obviously worked very well. How much? What was your original goal as far as fundraising?
At the very beginning, I said I would want to hit 100,000, and I pretty much hit it right on the nose by election day.
When you were building out that number, as far as how much you needed in that budget, was that just kind of you threw a dart at the board? Was that a broken down number? You said, hey, these are the different things we're going to spend the money on. How'd you arrive at that number you needed?
I might not have had the most specific budget in the world, but I do know 3 or 4 of kind of the most popular campaign managers and campaign consultants in the state. And so I met with them and said, hey, what's the number that you think I need to run the kind of race that you know that I do in order to win? And that was the number that kind of everybody said, well, we don't think you can hit it, but if you did hit it,
thanks for the confidence, guys.
Good shot. Yeah.
Gotcha. So you went through, and from there you kind of broke out the budget and you built your spending plan around that fundraising plan from there.
Yes, I've kind of built 3 proposals, right? So I said, what's the lowest number that I could get away with running a decent campaign? What's the bronze plan? That was 60. Then the silver, okay, that's a decent, a good campaign at 80. And then the gold plan, we got everything that we could need. That was the 100 number, and that's why we set that as our goal.
Well, that's a very impressive effort from both how you ran the pipeline for the fundraising on down through the budgeting process. It's obvious you were very systematic about how you approach it. I definitely think that's the right way to go about it. I hope that more of our listeners will kind of approach it that way, because if you take an inventory of your assets, of your liabilities, and then you build your fundraising plan specifically to communicate who you are and why you're worth investing in to your donors, it's going to be much more effective than if you just say, okay, well, this is what I believe, and this is my 5-point plan, and you're conservative, I'm a conservative, therefore you should cut me a check. And that's the way too many folks do it.
And the last thing I will say about that is when I did call or dial for dollars, there are 3 things that I always try to put in every call. One, which is, this is not a frivolous investment. I am going to get as close, if not win this race. Number 2, ask for a specific amount. And 3, by a specific time. And 4, by a specific for a specific purpose. So, for example,
that's good.
You know that this donor gave $1,000 to 3 other legislative candidates. You get through your whole spiel, and then you say, sir, I'm trying to get out this mail piece. Our mail plan. I'm $5,000 short for this mail plan that will really help us pay for X, Y, or Z. Can you help us with $1,000 of that so that we can print, 1,200 more rack cards or whatever, right? And in my experience, if you were specific and you had that foresight to say, look, I need the $1,000 not just because I'm trying to raise $1 gazillion, but actually because that money is going to be spent on mail and on this specific piece, if you can, to this specific universe, and I need it in the next week so that this piece can go out. You really create that sense of urgency, and then people respond a lot better to it because they know that you're not going to waste their money because you've told them specifically what that money is going to be used for.
Right. Yeah, asking specific amount, specific time frame, and for a specific purpose does a lot to help lock down that donor support, because in many cases you're talking about folks they obviously have some kind of money to give, otherwise you wouldn't be talking to them. And many of these folks have been quite successful, at least in in their own life and in what they consider to be their goals. So the way they got there was typically by having a decent plan, knowing good opportunities from bad on the whole. And when you can show them that what they're investing in is specific, it's measurable, and that you've taken the time to plan this out really well, they're going to have a lot higher confidence level that their investment is actually going to have some strong ROI.
It really does put you to the top of the pack, because I can't tell you how many times people, when I said that, said, wow, nobody's ever actually put it like that before on a call. And these are people that oftentimes they get called, 15, 20 times in an election cycle because they're the donors, so you can separate yourself from that pack if you follow that formula. And it actually, in some cases, means that they'll donate more to you because you've proven
right.
yourself all that more impressive.
All right, so we talked quite a bit about those things that you felt really confident in, that you felt like you did really well. Let's jump over to the less pleasant side, kind of the lessons learned. What are some of those areas within the campaign where you wish you had had more preparation, or you feel like you maybe fumbled the execution a little bit?
Number one, I wish that I could have listened to this call at the beginning of the campaign, because obviously you get more efficient with it as you go along. You learn those lessons. So of course, the first couple of times we had volunteers come out, it wasn't the most efficient machine in the world, but we quickly learned. So obviously, every second that you waste when you're doing that is a second you wish you could have back. Number two, I think we could have done a lot more with individual voter targeting. We did a lot with purchasing lists and things, but that's not something that is really pervasive in Nebraska like it is in a lot of other states. Nebraska legislative races are really pretty vanilla. It's knock on doors, raise money, and direct mail, and there's some radio, but almost no TV, and it's pretty traditional. And I wish that I could go back and started doing those unconventional voter targeting, which is really like 21st century stuff, which we should have been doing 16 years ago. But I wish we would have done more of that earlier in the campaign, because I think we could have done a better job of providing specific messages to voters earlier in the campaign, which would have broken through later in the campaign. Because we would go door to door and we would ask them what their most important issues are, and we got that data and we tried to message to it later in the campaign. But the better, if we were better organized earlier, I think we could have leveraged it a lot better late.
How would you have deployed some of that knowledge? Like, what are a couple of specific areas where you're like, hey, I wish we would have done this? Are you talking about like social media targeting, better door-to-door targeting? What are you talking about there?
Yes, I mean, social media targeting for sure. I was not necessarily pleased with our performance on social media and on the web, that kind of targeting, because we didn't really do very much of it, because frankly we didn't know if we were going to have the budget for it until late in the campaign. And then the other thing, in terms of the individual voter targeting going door to door, if we could have budgeted for it earlier, I would have purchased the lists and things to match with the voter file before I knocked on doors at the beginning, because especially that first time through door knocking when I'm introducing myself to folks, if I would have had more of that information earlier, I think I could have kicked my foot more in the door and made it more memorable for voters in that first round, because I had a small enough district. There were only about 19,000 votes cast in my race. So knocking on 23,000 doors, you're going every Republican's home 3 times and every Democrat and Independent's at least once. So you really start to people start to get to know you, and the more information that I could use to have a unique and specific message to them through leveraging voter data, I wish we would have done that.
Now, as you were preparing for the campaign, I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that you read and think resources you try to avail yourself of. Were those all that you wanted, or were there more things that you wish you would have had access to?
There are definitely more things I wish I had access to. I mean, I knew that there was this massive data operation being used on the Democrat side. I mean, obviously, we've all read David Plouffe's book on Obama 2008, but I didn't know where to go. I mean, I saw the presidential race and the Cruz teams leveraging of it, and I said, is that something that I can even budget for? I mean, how do you go about doing that? Who do I talk to? And so I think that there just needs to be a lot more education of state parties and candidates about where they can go and actually how affordable and necessary that kind of voter targeting and leveraging is, especially for down ballot races where money and time is at a premium.
That's definitely a subject that's very near and dear to my heart. That's a lot of what caused me to start My Campaign Coach, and part of the problem that I'm hoping to ameliorate. Right, I want to help provide opportunities and really bring in a lot of other people that provide education as well. That's part of why we started the podcast and bringing folks like yourself and others on, because I love learning myself. That's why I go to conferences and I read and I bring on these guests, because I want to learn from you guys and a lot of these people we have on, from Chris Wilson and Josh Perry and on down the line. Are there specific areas, you mentioned the voter targeting and some of those technological resources, are there other areas within the campaign that you felt like you really wish you would have had more preparation or more teaching?
I wish that I could have had somebody that could have sat down with me for the beginning, especially the first 100 fundraising calls. I mean, it was it was just a heart-wrenching thing for me to do. Everybody said, okay, you got to call. But I frankly didn't know the first thing about it. I mean, I called my family and said, hey, I'm running. You should give me money. And that's not necessarily the most powerful message. So, I'm grateful that there are now people like yourself that are wanting to teach people how to do that. It was a very daunting thing to have to pick up the phone at the very beginning and go, okay, I have an event. You should come. It doesn't come naturally to me.
Well, it doesn't come naturally really to anybody, regardless of whether you're prepared when you step into your role as a candidate or not. You had to learn these skills at some point. And for yourself being a younger guy, you just hadn't had the opportunity to build those skills yet. And frankly, a lot of other candidates that are much older haven't had that opportunity either. Yeah. And that's a lot of why we want to help prepare people through both our free resources and our paid courses. But I'll give you one of the pieces of advice that I give a lot of people is when you're doing those first calls, even if you don't have somebody that's an experienced fundraiser, just get somebody to sit down with you and help take notes. Put them on speakerphone, add another line or something like that. But have somebody that can listen in on your calls, even if they don't know a thing about fundraising, because they'll at least know something about interpersonal communication and helping you as they listen to what seems to work and what doesn't, because you're in your head. When you're making these first calls, you're all up in your head, you're trying to analyze everything you're saying while you're trying to answer the question, while you're trying to think through how can I do this better, all of that at the same time. And it really helps if you can just hand off part of that responsibility, the taking notes, thinking about things you need to follow up on, what seems to work and what doesn't. Every now and then you'll say something and you're like, man, I wish I had that written down because it was a really good line. And you're like, I want that when I go out to the stump speech next week. Well, having somebody take some notes, if you got a girlfriend or a brother or sister or somebody that can sit down with you, have them take notes, have them write down some of that stuff. And after these calls, just have a brief break and say, hey, how'd I do? 1 to 10. And, what could I do better? Okay, take a breath, next call. And by keeping those notes, one, you'll probably come up with some good lines, some great feedback from donors because they're going to give you feedback too that you'll want to remember. But you're going to be able to do that a lot, you'll have a lot higher level of sanity when you complete the calls. And with having somebody else there to kind of hold you accountable to make sure you keep slogging along, you're going to waste a lot less time as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's sage wisdom. Absolutely, positively.
What else did you find that you wish you could have learned more about ahead of time or wish you would have done differently?
I wish that somebody would have told me to be a little bit more forceful at the door. I'm a pretty well-mannered guy. I don't like upsetting the apple cart too much outside of politics. And so when people would come to the door, I recognize that they are almost always eating dinner or something. But if looking back at the numbers, basically the way that it turned out was anybody that didn't give me an authoritative yes, we support you, ended up not voting for me. And the margin was just a couple hundred votes for me. So I wish I would have been a little bit more forceful by saying, oh, you're hesitant? Well, let me just remind you, that I'm a conservative Republican running against the most liberal Democrat in my legislature, and this is a really important race. I wish that I would have learned to make that case a little bit more forcefully. You don't have to disrespect people. Obviously, you still want to respect their time, but just kind of up the ante a little bit more rather than just saying, "Hi, I'm shaking your hand so you can see my face, and here's a piece of literature," and my 1 minute elevator talk. To say this is really important. We disagree on bang, bang, bing, bing, bing issues, and I really think that I'm really hoping that you'll support me on November 8th.
Well, as you're doing that, it's important folks to remember that, similar to what you said, unless somebody says, yes, I will support you, they're probably not going to. This is all a result of social pressure, right? So when my teams are out surveying folks, I'll see, on the support question, we'll see, yes, support, no support, undecided, refused, right? They said to shut up and leave me alone. So when I look at those numbers, like for instance, I was working for a state rep this last primary here in March, and I showed him the numbers, and he was like, "Oh, dude, these are awesome. We got high yeses, we got really high, we got high decideds, but if those break down the same as the yeses and nos, then that's gonna be great." And what I told him was, look, this is not polling data. This is not a scientific thing. It's even most polling, it's hard to consider that scientific, but this is far from it. You literally have somebody in your campaign shirt showing up on Ian's front porch asking you to support this guy whose shirt you're wearing.
Yeah.
Social pressure dictates that they don't want to get into confrontation on their front porch. They're going to say that they're undecided at a higher rate than they truly are, and they're also going to say yes at a higher rate than they are. What you end up seeing is that a number of the folks that say yes some of them are going to turn out to be truly undecided, and a whole lot of the undecideds, especially if you're talking about somewhere close to an election, those are actually no's, but they just don't want to tell you, either because they're scared of confrontation or because they don't want the other campaign, the one they're not voting for, to know their true feelings. Yeah. So you gotta keep that in mind, and to your point, throughout the campaign, this changes a little bit as far as how hard you might want to push. Typically got 3 phases: identify, persuade, and turnout. You're gonna have to vote phase. And when you're early on, hopefully you're knocking doors really early and you're getting out there so you can make those multiple passes like you did on these doors. And in that kind of situation, you have some time. You have some follow-on contacts to have with these folks. And your focus early on is just to have an interaction and make it positive. Leave something positive behind, hopefully 1 or 2 of these bullet points that you got implanted in their head about you. And then as you move forward, the persuasion time, that's really when you need to start locking down the yeses. Because these people they've heard your name, they know something about you, and now's where you need to really spend the time in pulling them in your direction. And most of the time, you're not going to pull a no to a yes. But there'll be a whole lot of people a couple months out from an election, especially in one that's down ballot, where you can educate them and persuade them in your direction based on their key issues. Yeah. And so you've already identified kind of where they stand, whether they're persuadable or not. Now you're actually going to leverage that information, and you want to pull them your way. And you want to take that opportunity at the door, especially if you're the candidate, to talk to them and say, hey, what are your hangups? What is keeping you from getting to a yes? And find ways to help work through those. And don't just assume that because they're undecided that they're going to break your direction. Until you get that yes, don't assume they're going to vote for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's especially true, after Election Day, when you do the post-op, the numbers, everything that you just said is 100% true. And it's hard to believe as a candidate because you want to believe, you want to take people at their word. You want to believe them when they say, oh, I don't know, or, I just don't have time, or of course I'll support you. But you just have to continuously work under the assumption that you need to touch them more and touch them more and touch them more. And so I guess I wish that I wish I would have known that so that I could have just continually reminded people of the stakes of it. Now, if you're a Republican running against a Republican, maybe the lesson might be a little bit different in terms of making that contrast so stark. But, for me, knowing that all I needed to do was convince Republicans to vote for the Republican, and then seeing at the end of the day that a whole bunch of Republicans didn't come home, you wish that you could have just continuously reminded them of the fact that, hey, there's only one Republican in this race, right. And it's me.
Yeah, you would hope that was easier than it actually turned out to be, but it's an important lesson to know. Well, Ian, I really appreciate you being on here with us today and sharing so much of your experiences, kind of the good and the bad. Is there anything else that you want to make sure our listeners get before we wrap things up?
Just that it actually was not nearly as complicated and as hard as I thought it was going to be running for office. So for anybody who's considering it, it's a really tough thing. You have to go through withering criticism. The attack ads are never easy to stomach. But at the same time, if you're willing to do the work, if you're willing to put yourself in front of doors, if you believe in the cause, there is no more rewarding thing than saying, I put my foot into the arena, I fought the good fight, I ran a good race, and I made my principles proud. So I hope that despite all of these comments and good and bad things that we've been talking about, that I can still encourage people to get involved in the political process and consider running for office themselves, because we need a lot more good people to step up, learn these lessons, and go win.
We absolutely do. I can't tell you how much I appreciate, one, you being willing to run, take that opportunity, and share with us the lessons. And I'll tell you what, I really look forward to seeing what happens next time you run, because I think we'll be seeing some different results, and hopefully get to have you back on to share all the great things you learn on a successful campaign next time around. So thank you again for coming on this week, Ian. Everybody check out the show notes for all Ian's content information and the links we referenced during the show. And we'll talk to you all again next week.
Please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help spread the word. We'll be back with you next week with more campaign insights from My Campaign Coach.